Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Happy Sabbath to you. Happy Sabbath to those who are on the web. Welcome. It's a beautiful day out today. This is what we've been waiting for all winter long, isn't it? This hard winter we had to suffer through. Finally, we have some spring, right? I like to listen to podcasts. It's probably my favorite mediums. I like to listen to all the different stories. Some of them are news items. Some of them are, based on like documentary style podcasts. There was a podcast I listened to recently, and it recounted something that I already knew about, something I had already remember actually experiencing in real life. Back in 2000, I'm starting with a baseball story, so let me just go ahead and get that out there. Back in 2000, the St. Louis Cardinals had this up-and-comer pitcher, and he was going to be fantastic. He was going to be amazing for the ball club. He was a lefty. He was strong. He was actually a good hitter for a pitcher, too, which is really rare. He was my age, which I always thought was kind of cool, because he was in the big leagues at a young age, and everything looked great for him. Everything looked great. His name was Rick Ankiel. Does anybody recognize that name? Okay. So Rick Ankiel, he was a strong pitcher, good lefty. Everything looked good. Stats from the scouting looked fantastic, and he started to pitch the year 2000. He was pitching pretty well. Something happened though in the middle of the season. He threw a couple wild balls just randomly. I mean, so high that the catcher had to jump, standing up, and he still missed it. Wild pitch. Absolutely wild pitch. He threw a couple more that season, and, he was able to get control eventually. But during the NLDS game against the Atlanta Braves game, I believe it was game 1, he pitched a good, solid first inning and second inning. But in the third inning, something happens to him. He pitches a wild pitch, way over the catcher's head. He pitches another wild pitch. Eventually, the guy gets on. I think he walked a guy, or the guy got a hit. Anyway, someone gets on base, first base. He throws enough wild pitches to get the guy all the way around and eventually to home plate. This is the top, level of professional baseball you can get to, and this poor guy. It was heartbreaking to watch. He threw 5 wild pitches in that game before they took him out. And, a lot of commentators at the time, they recognized what was going on, because this isn't the first time it's ever happened to a pitcher. They actually have a term called the Steve Blass disease. Does anyone know who Steve Blass is? You Pittsburgh guys should. He was a pitcher in the 70s, and the same thing happened to him. He was pitching. He actually had a very solid career beforehand. But something happened internally that they could not overcome. There was, these players work on mechanics. There was absolutely nothing wrong with these gentlemen physically. There was nothing wrong with them physically. What happened? It was a head game. It was in their head that they couldn't overcome. It was in their thoughts. There's absolutely nothing wrong physically, but they could never overcome this mental state. They never did. Now, Rick Ankiel got bumped down to the minors, he worked himself back up to become an outfielder later, had an okay career as an outfielder, bounced around the league a little bit. And like I said, he was a good hitter, so that worked out for him. But as a pitcher, never recovered. Was never able to overcome this mental state where mentally they could no longer perform what they had practiced so long to do. We are called by God, and we are given insight into His truth. But our insight to His truth and His plan of salvation, it doesn't end with knowledge. We have to put it into practice. And putting a life that we see in the pages of the Bible into practice means that you and I as people have to be overcomers. we are called to be overcomers. There are situations in our lives that we are called to recognize in our life, and we're called to be overcomers in those situations in our life. If you just skip back to Revelation real quick, we're going to look at just a couple things in the first couple chapters, couple verses. What's interesting, this is dealing with the letters to the churches in the first, or second and third chapter of the book. I took the left one, the left water, so. Revelation 2, there's something that is absolutely, it's present in all the churches here in Revelation that we see here. Let's go ahead and go to Revelation 2, the church to Ephesus, verse 7. To him who overcomes, I will give to eat from the tree of life. To the church in Smyrna, verse 11. He who overcomes shall not be hurt by the second death. To the church in Pergamos, verse 17. To him who overcomes, I will give him of the hidden manna to eat. To the church of Thyatira, that would be verse, where am I bouncing around to? Verse 26, and he who overcomes and keeps my works until the end, to him I will give power over the nations. Chapter 3, to the church of Sardis, verse 5, he who overcomes shall be clothed in white garments, and I will not blot out his name from the book of life. To the church of Philadelphia, that's right, even the church of Philadelphia has things to overcome, because in verse 12, he who overcomes, I will make him a pillar in the temple of my God, and he shall go out no more, and I will write on him the name of my God and the name of the city of my God. And to the church of Laodicea, verse 21, to him who overcomes, I will grant to sit with me on my throne, as I also overcame and sat down with my Father on his throne. These letters were written to the churches. All of them had something to overcome. They all had refining to take part of. You know, even in the coveted Philadelphia church has things that they can overcome. We're not perfect. None of us are. We weren't called, and God knows these guys are perfect. We were called, and we are to be overcomers. If you look at the Greek word of the word overcome, it is nikao, and it's very exciting to read, you know, the synonyms that this word is also translated into. Overcame, overcome, overpowers, prevail, victorious. Doesn't that sound exciting? Isn't those the kind of attributes you'd like to have tagged to your name? Overcomers. Well, that's who we're called to be. We're called to be overcomers in our lives. But what does that look like? What do we have to overcome? What do we have to overcome in our life? I'd like to talk about just 3 specific things as we're getting ready for the spring holy days, things that we should be focusing on and overcoming our lives. Now, this is obviously not an exhaustive list, but something that we can take a look at today and see where we're at. Because really, to be an overcomer, it is introspective work. You know, you can't be just sort of a couch potato Christian and overcome. Overcoming takes work and effort. The first thing we have to overcome is obvious sin. Sin, weakness in our human nature. Let's go over to Ephesians real quick. To the book of Ephesians. We're called to overcome sin in our lives. Ephesians 4. Verse 22, Ephesians 4, verse 22, that you put off concerning your former conduct the old man which grows corrupt according to the deceitful lusts. Verse 23, and be renewed in the spirit of your mind, and that you put on a new man which was created according to God in true righteousness and holiness. Transformation should be happening in our daily lives. Every day we should be transforming. We should be putting off what we were and continue putting on the new man, as it says here, the wording that it says here. We're called to overcome. Overcome the person that we started with at our baptism or at our calling. If we look back and say, I haven't really overcome anything, that is a cause for concern. That's when we should stop and say, what can I do in my life to make sure that I am overcoming? Because that needs to happen in our lives. It absolutely has to happen in our lives. Let's go back to 2 Peter. 2 Peter 2. Starting in verse 20. This is specifically talking to false teachers. It's giving a warning about false teachers here, Peter is. But I think that we can take some of the principles from this. 2 Peter 2, verse 20 says, "For if they had escaped the pollutions of the world," I like the way that that's worded, escape the pollutions of the world. The Bible says things, sometimes it's very poetic in some of the ways that it's written. Having escaped the pollutions of the world is, seeing the moral, just pollution, how it could pollute the insides of us as, we go about our everyday lives, and we see, the world especially becoming more and more polluted today morally. But once you've escaped that pollution, once you've said, I recognize what's going on in the world, and you escape that pollution, verse 20, through the knowledge of the Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, they are again entangled and overcome. The latter end is worse for them than the beginning. For it would have been better for them not to have known the way of righteousness than having known it, to turn from the holy commandment delivered to them. This is a scary warning for us, I believe. When you have known the truth and you start to not only overcome, but be overcome by the world around us, it says it's better to have not have even known. Not to have even known. The opposite of an overcomer is someone who succumbs, someone who submits, someone who fails, someone who loses. We want to overcome sin and not let it overcome us. Human nature and our weakness, doesn't have to run our lives. We don't have to be a slave to it. We have to be careful in our society. Today I just listened to a sermon this morning about, are you a confident Christian? And that is, are you confident so much in your beliefs that you can stand up to the moral decline you see in the world around us? Because more and more, those of us who recognize the morals of the Bible, we are not the same. We do not have the same moral bar set for us. And are you confident? Because we can be easily tainted by the pollution of the moral decline we see around us. The world around us sees, and they make decisions based on their feelings. Well, I don't feel that that's right. I don't feel that that's very fair. I don't feel that that's very, kind. Well, the Bible is very black and white, and it's the best way for us to live. So we have to be able to, know what we believe. It was a very good sermon by Mr. Martin I listened to this morning. We don't want to be tainted by the world's sin and the moral decline we see around us. And when it comes to personal sin, what makes it difficult to overcome a lot of times is, let's be honest, it feels good. Because there is instant gratification when it comes to many of the sins. It feels good to have that extra beer or third beer, fourth beer. It feels good. That's hard to overcome. It feels good to lust. Pick your poison. It feels good. There is an immediate gratification that Satan offers us when he is trading us for our moral ground. But that's what we're called to overcome. We're called to overcome. We're called to be above that. I remember, I spent many years in the woods of Pennsylvania going to Camp Heritage, and I loved doing it. And I remember having, some chats and trying to give the guys some pep talks, about life and about, you know, making right decisions in their lives, making right decisions that won't lead to despair or bad situations. And I remember, one of the chats I had with one of the older groups, I was telling them to save themselves for marriage. And I said that anybody can go out and, meet some girl and, have a fun night. I go, anybody can do that. The world around us, that is available. I said, are you man enough, though, to not give in to that temptation? Because we are called to be overcomers. We're called to recognize the situation of sin and overcome, not succumb to the situations we may find ourselves in. So we have to overcome sin. Number 2, we have to overcome the temptations, what leads to sin. We have to be victorious in those situations. Being tempted is not where we've gone too far, right? So we haven't yet sinned because the temptation is there, but we have to be able to overcome when we are faced with temptation. So what do we do to overcome in a situation where we may find ourselves tempted, where we have not yet sinned, but the opportunities are there? Let's go back to Luke 11. Luke 11. I'm really dry today. 3 cups of coffee was not a good choice. Luke 11, and this is Jesus giving the prayer, the example prayer, the model prayer for us. Verse 4 says, "Forgive us our sins, for we also forgive everyone who is indebted to us, and do not lead us into temptation." When we find ourselves in a spot where we are facing temptation, we have to go to the source of power. We have to pray about it. I know there's been times in my life where I've faced temptation, and I could not get over these temptations until I prayed to God. And I asked, I said, I am too weak. Please, give me the strength. Give me the power. And he does. Because he wants us to overcome. He's in our corner. He's not up there just waiting, I'm going to zap him as soon as he does it. He's in our corner, and if we yield to him and go to him and pray to him, he'll be there for us. Another thing to do in the face of temptation is just avoid. Let's go to Proverbs 22. Proverbs 22, obviously, there's very practical things that we can live by in the book of Proverbs. Proverbs 22 says, in the face of temptation, verse 3. Oh, that's the wrong chapter. Here we go. A prudent man foresees evil and hides himself. To foresee evil, you have to know, okay, if I put myself in this situation, I will be faced with temptation. We have to avoid. To overcome in the face of temptation, we have to know where our weaknesses are and just avoid them. And that's just being prudent. That is what a wise, prudent man does. He foresees evil and he hides himself from him. He avoids it. In the face of temptation, to overcome, we need to pray. We need to avoid. And we also need to just flee. Let's go to 1 Corinthians 13. 1 Corinthians. We're called to recognize in our lives where we have weaknesses, and we're called to overcome. And in the face of temptation, the third thing we need to do is 1 Corinthians 6. Now, this is a very direct command, but I think the principle is there for us. Verse 18, flee sexual morality. Every sin that a man does is outside the body, but he who commits sexual immorality sins against his own body. If you're faced with temptation, flee. flee. Sometimes we might find ourselves in a spot where we can't think it out ahead of time. Something came in front of us, and we're just in the situation now, and that is the time to be wise and flee. So we are called to overcome sin. We are called to overcome the temptation that we find ourselves. And the third point today I'd like to talk about is overcoming attitude. Some of the attitudes we may find ourselves in. I think there are two things I could break this down into. Attitudes towards other people. Let's talk about that first. Attitudes towards other people. Philippians 2:3 has some very good information for us there. Because we do have to overcome how we feel about other people. The first and the second great commandments, love God and love your neighbor. That means inside us, we can't have this attitude about someone else. We can't have certain attitudes that we look down at other people. Philippians 2, verse 3, let this mind be done, or let nothing be done through selfish ambition or conceit, but in lowliness of mind, esteem others better than himself. If we actually did that, what conflict could there be? If we actually esteemed, I can have a disagreement with somebody, but if I am going to esteem them and say, God has called this person, God is, working with this person as well, and I esteem them and say, maybe they know something that I don't, maybe. What conflicts could we have if we actually put this into practice? We need to be peacemakers in our lives. We need to have loving care for each other. And peace has a rippling effect. If there is a person who is standing ground and being peaceful in their lives, it affects your family, it affects your friends. Just like someone who is angry, that affects people, a peacemaker does that as well. And that's what we're called to be as well, peaceful. To overcome attitudes towards other people, let's esteem others better than ourselves. Let's be peacemakers. Romans says, if possible, as much depends on you, live peaceably among all men. We can go out and live a life of being a light to the people around us and still be peaceful people, because that's what we're called to be. In terms of dealing with each other, too, in the congregation, a lot of times we need to be careful not to see someone else and a struggle someone else may be having and saying, seeing them and having an attitude about, they're just weaker. They're just not very strong. They're not a very strong person. That's an attitude we have to be careful for, too, because God called so-and-so wherever they're at in their growth process. And just because they haven't overcome something doesn't mean that we should say, what's wrong with that guy? He just doesn't have it. Doesn't have it together. Because sometimes where I'm weak, you may not see. And I assure you, I have weaknesses too. God calls us to be peaceful. We should be encouraging to those people who are struggling in areas. That's why we're to be, loving and caring and not have an attitude towards other people. Another place that we need to watch our attitude is just, our lot in life. We're trying to teach this to our kids now, specifically Edie, because kids want, you give them something, and this was nice, but I would like to have more. I was grateful for 1 scoop of ice cream, but 2 would be even better. Right? Now that's a pretty simple way to think about it, because a lot of times, we find ourselves in situations that we're not, grateful to be in. But that's what we need to watch our attitude. We need to watch our attitude, because no matter what, if we truly believe, God has put us here, and he is working with me, and whatever situation that I'm in, if I can learn from that, that's sort of where we should be with our attitude. Not a woe is me, not I'm going to complain to everybody else about it. Edie was on the bus, and she was struggling with some kids. And that's what I like about schools, because there's two educations. There's the education you learn at school, but also, she had to deal with some kids on the bus who were not very pleasant. Now, I said, you can complain about it, you can get angry, or, you can turn a cheek, you can be kind and respectful, and you can disagree. Because when you get older, those people exist in the world. They exist. So we need to watch our attitude towards other people and to just our lot in life, where we're at. And this is something that we can overcome. We have to see what's going on inside of us and overcome that. Because there are enemies of overcoming. There's enemies out there. One simple one is, well, I wouldn't say simple, but something that could be an enemy of our ability to overcome is just complacency. I'm doing okay. I'm okay. I'm just going to be super content with where I'm at morally, spiritually. I'm okay. That's an enemy of overcoming. Because it takes energy. It takes passion. It takes zeal. If there's anything that I've struggled with, I know it's complacency and being content. I'm doing okay. I'm a nice guy. I'm kind of likable. But that's dangerous. That's dangerous. Deep down there are some things that we're all struggling with, and we're called to be overcomers. And it takes work. It takes work. We shouldn't be okay with where we're at. We should continue to say, you know what, I've reached this goal. I'm going to make it. Here's my next goal. Here's my next bar. Because I look at the life of Jesus Christ, and he was an overcomer, and this is my next. This is what I'm going to work on next. We're called to be overcomers. When Harry was born, I had a hard time, just finding time to. When can I read my Bible? I am struggling. It took me a while. It took work. It took work. But I finally found I overcame that so that I could have time and personal time with God, and it takes overcoming. I couldn't just sit on the couch and say, God, give me the power to do it. And I'm just going to wait. It takes work to overcome. But we're not supposed to be overwhelmed with how much overcoming that we see in our lives. Because a lot of times during this time of year, let's go over to John 14. A lot of times during this time of year, we're going through our scriptures, we're seeing the benchmark that Jesus Christ set, and we think, oh man, there is a ton that I have got to overcome. But that's not where we're supposed to be either. We're not supposed to be in a spot where you are just beat down because you can't, you see how much overcoming you have. That's what Satan wants you to believe. He wants you to think that you are not good enough. But God called you, and God gave you something to help you overcome. John 14, verse 16, Jesus is spending his last Passover with his disciples, and he says to them, I will pray the Father, and he will give you another helper, that he may abide with you forever. I like that it's called the helper, because that's what we need at times. To be able to overcome, I need some help. I am not strong enough on my own. And that's great that we're not. We have the helper with us. Another enemy of overcoming is just Satan out there to get us. 1 Peter, says that he is like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. We've been watching Planet Earth. You know who the lions go after? The weak ones, right? The ones who haven't overcome. Might be struggling with a gimp leg. That's who the lion goes after. But if we're continually working and overcoming, we're going to be a strong one. We're going to be a strong one. One that the lion can't get to. What's most encouraging, though, is that we have a perfect example of someone who overcomes. And that's who we are looking to as our example in our lives. Let's turn over just a couple pages to John 16, because Jesus Christ gives us some very encouraging words throughout this, and we're going to be reading this on the Passover, I'm sure, and throughout the weeks as we've been preparing spiritually for the upcoming feast season. John 16, verse 33, Jesus says, "These things I have spoken to you, that in me you may have peace." And that's comforting to know. "In the world you will have tribulation, but be of good cheer. I have overcome the world." We have someone that we look to who is an overcomer. And when we do spend the time daily looking at this, we can be encouraged by that. Because there's a big portion that's at the end of the story. Let's go back to Revelation 17. We follow someone who is an overcomer. In Revelation 17, we're dealing with beasts, and we're dealing with, things that are going to happen in the future. And it's encouraging to see who we look to and who we side with as Christians. Revelation 17, the 10 horns, of the beast, which you saw, this is verse 12, which you saw are 10 kings who have received no kingdom as yet, but they received authority for 1 hour as kings with the beast. Verse 13, these are of one mind, they will give their power and authority to the beast, these are still the kings. And then verse 14, these will make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb will overcome them. For he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and those who are with him are called chosen and faithful. They're faithful because they spent their lives overcoming. We are those overcomers. That's exciting to see that we can look to Jesus Christ as our example of overcoming. I was a pitcher in Little League as well, and I was okay. I wasn't I couldn't throw the hardest. My brother actually was really good, my youngest brother. But I could hit the strike zone, pretty well. But you know what? I threw some wild pitches too. My dad would say, "What's going on? You threw it 10 feet in the air." I don't know. I don't know what was wrong. Thankfully, in spiritual matters, we're not alone. We're not alone. We have the Holy Spirit. I could yield to God, and I could pray to Him, could ask for help. We have each other as encouragers. I don't have to worry about the control issues I have as a pitcher anymore. Something much deeper now, isn't it? But there are some mental things as a pitcher I couldn't overcome. Our sins at times can manifest as physical actions, but at the heart of overcoming, it's an internal matter for each and every one of us. It's on the inside. When it comes to our spiritual lives, though, we're not alone. Romans 12:21 says, "Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good." I love the Feast of Unleavened Bread because for that week, I am focused on, the sin is gone, but I am going to be trying to put on righteousness and good. We're called to overcome in our lives. Let's make it a goal to put aside sin, attitudes that hurt peace, temptations. If we know we have a weakness, let's be vigilant, passionate, and zealous in overcoming. Be a people who are victorious. Be a people who prevail. Be a people who conquers. Be a people who overcome.